everybody, Chris Lano here behind the camera, and thanks for watching today's video. We're standing here with Paul Bertucci, part of our R&D and product development team, and today we're going to be talking about PCV systems on probably P1, P3 applications, and Paul is going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the PCV system on this particular car that we're working on today, which is a 2013 S60. But we want to cover some PCV stuff, and Paul's going to hit it. We're getting ready to do an overview of replacing the box. But Paul, why don't you go and talk about PCV and how it serves the Volvo and why it's so important?
Absolutely. The V in PCV is ventilation, and when we're talking about ventilating, we're talking about ventilating the crankcase gases inside the engine. A PCV system is really important because as the pistons move up and down inside the cylinders, the combustion gases don't all go out the exhaust. Some of them leak down into the engine, and the PCV system is in charge of taking all of those gases and sending them back into the intake so the inside of your engine doesn't pressurize too much. A good PCV system is important for keeping all your seals happy, and since that system is full of combustion gases and oil vapors, over time stuff gets plugged up, stuff can clog, and then inside your engine stuff will start pressurizing and you'll see oil leaks all over the place.
Thanks, Paul, for that quick overview on PCV. And since we're working on newer Volvo, anybody who's owned older Volvos know that the PCV systems have been a little bit convoluted. Volvo has done a better job with more modern vehicles like this car here on the P3 chassis, which started using this style of box that you have in your hand with the P1s, like your C30s, S40, and V50s and things like that. But we've seen different types of issues with these failing, even on the newer ones where the PCV is on the top of the cam assembly, right, or on the cam cover. But go ahead and tell people, instead of blowing out seals and all that kind of stuff, what kind of symptoms are we seeing with these particular boxes and these diaphragms that are in these PCV units?
We have to say we do like the new PCV style a lot more than the convoluted, like, spider hose style you saw on P80s and P2s. On P1s and P3s, both on the 5-cylinder like we have here and on the 6-cylinder, it's all been condensed down into one combination box. On these 5-cylinders, we've got the oil filter here as well as a diaphragm in here that controls the amount of vacuum that the PCV is pulling. Remember, it's trying to suck all the vapors out from inside the engine crankcase and send them back into the intake somewhere around here. So we want a PCV system that can regulate the amount of vacuum it's pulling, which is done with a little diaphragm under this cap here. IPD sells both a complete housing and a replacement diaphragm here, which includes a little spring and a rubber diaphragm piece that is in charge of regulating the amount of vacuum. As it pulls more vacuum, the diaphragm will open, and once it hits the right amount, it will close again, and the cycle repeats, and it keeps the amount of vacuum the PCV is pulling nice and steady. You don't want too much, and you don't want too little, because either is going to be bad for seals. And interestingly, this style of PCV, when it starts to go bad, we've noticed that these cars tend to start pulling a lot more vacuum. On older cars, when the PCV would go bad, it ends up causing less vacuum or even positive pressure inside the crankcase. So one thing you can look for on these when the PCV starts to go bad is a ton of vacuum being pulled, which you can figure out with a code reader. The car will start producing codes that are too lean, long-term fuel trims. It may even produce like boost or vacuum codes. But depending what particular symptoms you're having, it may be worth replacing just the diaphragm. We sell the diaphragm by itself as well as a complete kit with a new cap and a new spring. If you're noticing squealing noises, particularly at idle, that's a good sign that the diaphragm is ripped or the spring isn't producing enough pressure and it's not able to regulate vacuum properly. If you are getting those symptoms but you don't have any noises, or if you know the car just has been through a lot of short drive cycles, is driven in the cold a lot, it may be worth replacing the entire PCV box. This has the cap and spring to regulate the vacuum in it, as well as some stuff in here to pull out the oil vapors from the crankcase vapors. You've got a lot of little channels in here that separate all that oil out and drain it back into the engine. So if you are noticing little puffs of blue smoke out the exhaust, or lots of oil consumption but no oil leaks anywhere, replacing the whole box might be a good idea.
All right, so thanks, Paul, for that overview of the PCV system on that, especially because I think that's going to answer a lot of questions for our customers before we get started on taking this apart. We do sell a ton of those HD, basically caps with the diaphragm and the spring. So that is something that anybody can do if they start to get squealing. That's pretty much a dead giveaway, right? That thing's failed. So I think that anybody who wants to know whether or not they should spend the money on the actual whole assembly, which you do have to remove quite a this, which we'll go over, but the PCV is sitting down there on the front of the engine. This is a fairly simple replacement by doing the diaphragm, and we sell a ton of these. When does somebody determine whether or not they decide to just tackle this and then go for the whole PCV box, or just do this by itself?
A good indicator for doing just the diaphragm is squealing noise, particularly at idle. You can do what's called the glove test. That's a pretty easy way to check if you've got sufficient vacuum that the PCV is pulling. You pull the oil cap off while the engine is running, and you hold something like
a rubber glove over the top of it.
Over this here, and you want it to be slightly dished in, which means the engine's pulling a bit of vacuum. It's like trying to suck it out of your hand, or even worse, if it's starting to inflate like a balloon, you know your PCV system is cooked.
Right. But when those PCV diaphragms fail, they definitely start to whistle. Everybody out there that does research will see that there is a noise associated with that, which is a high-pitched whistle, like you're blowing through a blade of grass. That's usually because of the amount of vacuum that's being pulled. There is a little tiny hole in that cap, and the diaphragm is torn, which causes excess vacuum or pressure coming through there, so it will whistle. But on this car today, this car has taken a lot of short hops. It gets driven like 2 or 3 miles at a time, many key cycles throughout the day. It does blow a little bit of puff of smoke, blue smoke, after idle when it's warm. So that is definitely indicative of a failed PCV or a plugged PCV system, correct, Paul?
Absolutely.
And that's why we're deciding to tackle the box today and show you guys what it would take to get into this. So we sell this in an aftermarket version, a Volvo OEM version. We got many versions on the site. And Paul, go ahead and just cover. This is a P1 style, but it also fits later P3 cars. So this started with a car you're very familiar with those C30s, S40s, and V50s.
Yeah, we've got S60 T5 here, but my personal car is a V50 T5, and they use the same motor here. This is the last revision of Volvo's 5-cylinder called the RNC, or Revised N Compact, and it's all basically the same motor in a P1 or a P3, and that goes right down to this combined PCV and oil separator and oil filter housing. Both the genuine Volvo one we have here, Man & Hummel is the OES manufacturer for Volvo here, and the aftermarket PCV housing that we sell come with an oil filter pre-installed. Since this sits pretty low on the motor and drains all of the oil captured from the crankcase vapors back into the oil pan, you want to drain your oil before starting this job, and since this has a new filter in it, now is a really good time for an oil change.
Right.
If you can line up the timing on that, that's a pretty good idea. This whole housing here sits down low, bolted to the side of the block there. You can see the top of the current housing where the oil filter goes. That corresponds to this cap here. So what we're going to do today is pull some stuff out of the way, unbolt this from the side of the block, and bolt on a new one.
Cool, let's get going. All right, Paul, since we're doing an overview on replacing the entire PCV unit, we'll show what the diaphragm looks like removing it once we get the old box off, but let's go ahead and replace the entire box here. Why don't you go let everybody know who's watching, you know, as an overview, what we're going to tackle first.
It's not too bad on these, especially on a P3 like this. This engine bay was designed for larger engines than this 2.5 5-cylinder, so we have a decent amount of room here. It's a little bit tighter in a P1, but still very doable. We don't need to remove on turbo models the intake manifold here. There's enough room underneath to remove the PCV box, but we do need to remove the combined ECU and air filter housing here. This entire box right here will need to come out. It's in the way. Luckily, Volvo designed these so that this entire box can be removed as one piece. We have some quick connects under the ECU cover right here, a big connector and a small connector. We'll do that. We will unbolt this air intake tube, unplug the MAF, and this whole housing here with the ECU still attached will lift up and pivot out. Go ahead.
ECU cover.
And we've got two connectors for the ECU here, one up high. Press on that tab and push down to release. And we have an identical fitting down here. Push on that little tab there and pull the lever to unplug it.
Set aside.
We're gonna unplug our MAF next. Push that little tab and slide that off. The cable on the MAF is attached to the airbox housing, and since the airbox housing is coming out, we need to push on this with a little socket in order to get it to come off the tab.
All right, remove the harness there. Nice. Okay.
Okay, on P3s, not on P1s, interestingly enough, we've got the air duct for the filter here running over to behind the driver's side headlight. On a P1, the duct is down here, kind of an elbow that goes up over to here. On both of those cars, you'll want to remove the duct.
Right.
This looks like it just pulls right out.
Okay, nice. Now you got those tabs depressed, you can pull that out. Great.
So two tabs here, and then one more notch on the other side. So press those tabs in from the front, and you should be able to pull it out. It may take a little bit of muscle.
Nice.
We've got one bolt back here holding this pipe in place, and we'll undo one of these two accordion hose clamps. It doesn't really matter which, as long as we can move the pipe a bit of the way out. This intake resonator here is soft, so we don't need to undo this. If we remove this bolt and one of these clamps, we can pull this off the MAF, and that's enough for us to pull that out of the way and remove the airbox.
Okay.
Your ECU and airbox housing has never been removed from the car before, the harness for the ECU might still be zip tied to the side there. We've got one here and another one here. It's okay just to clip those zip ties. The harness is held in place pretty securely by the plugs on the ECU. This removed, and it doesn't need to be removed that far. We are going to lift the airbox up, and then we should be able to kind of pivot it out. The airbox is held in place with a couple of tabs and rubber grommets that push on under the intake manifold. So we need to grab under the airbox, and you're gonna pull straight up towards you just a couple of inches, and that should get it free. With it free of the tabs, and on this P3 you've got 3, one there, and then 2 more down low.
Yep.
You can see the rubber grommets where those press in. It'll take a pretty good amount of force to pull that out. But with that disconnected,
the box comes out. Very good. And now we have complete access to seeing the front of the PCV housing and oil filter housing all right there.
now that we have the PCV box exposed, we can see what we've got to disconnect here. There's 2 hoses going to it. We've got a short L-shaped hose here that runs from the diaphragm into the bottom of the intake manifold. And then we have a longer L-shaped hose here that starts down in the box and goes all the way up into the top of the cylinder head there. You don't have to replace either of these hoses, but you might have to. They've got to come off of the PCV box in order for us to get it out. This hose isn't clamped, you can just pull it off there. This hose has an autoker on it though. You'll have to pull that autoker off, see if you can get some pliers in there to pull it apart. If you can't, don't worry too much about it. You'll just have to cut this long L-shaped hose and replace it. We've got genuine Volvo and aftermarket examples of that too. Even the genuine Volvo one isn't very expensive. Something to keep in mind.
Right, okay, so now you're going to go ahead and disconnect the the heating element that's there on top of the box, and then go ahead and remove those hoses, correct?
This guy here.
Yep, nice.
Little electrical heater. It's the same on P1s and P3s, but some very early P1s may not have this harness. So if you're working on a very early 2005 P1, you'll see just this exposed element here with nothing plugged into it, and that's okay.
Alright.
We've just about got everything unplugged on the box here. We have the PTC heater, which I unplugged, this L-shaped hose. It's still plugged in on one end, but the intake manifold end I was able to push off. And over here, this long hose that runs up to under the spark cover, I was able to remove the oil filter cap and get the clamp off the end. So we may be reusing those hoses, but again, if you can't get any of those clamps off, cut them for now and replace the hoses once you have the PCV box out of the way. With that done, we need to start thinking about unbolting the PCV box from the side of the block. We've got one more thing in front of it holding it in place. The oil dipstick is screwed in one spot right there. That's an 8mm bolt, which we'll be unbolting. We'll lift the dipstick straight out. And then from there, we've got 4 bolts holding the box to the side of the block. We've got 3 down here, and then 1 more up here on the corner. I've got that dipstick bolt out now. That's the only thing holding the dipstick and dipstick tube in place. We've got one little cable bracket here, which we'll make sure we remove so we don't break it on the way out. And then the whole dipstick will pull out of the oil pan we're going.
There we go. O-rings needed to let go.
It's good to check out this O-ring too. These, like everything else in the PCV system, can get hard and brittle with age.
Right.
On all of the 5 cylinders, both the brand new P3s and the old P80s and P2s, this O-ring is the same. We carry OEM and aftermarket versions of this O-ring as well, so give that a check when you have it out.
For video purposes, most people don't have a lift, but we're going to go ahead and shoot on the lift so we can show people where the boxes and the bolts that you're going to be tackling, which are right there on the bottom. We're looking directly at the bottom of the PCV box.
We've got our 3 lower bolts holding the box onto the side of the block. Here, here, and here.
Right up above that on the left.
And then we also have 1 more small bolt holding this little wire harness in place. This one here.
Right.
There's another zip tie holding the harness in place higher up that you're going to have to snip as well. That's over here.
Yep.
And once we have those out, we have 1 more upper bolt and we can pull the box off. This little bolt up here holding this cable bracket in place. We've got a couple of different bolt holes here on this PCV housing. Different cars have bolts and brackets in different places. They're not all the same bolt, so it's important as you remove them one by one to store them on your new housing so you know where they go later. On these new PCV housings, even though these bolts are threaded, there are not actually threads cut. So you're going to be using your bolts, and we suggest doing that on the new housing with it out here on the bench like this. You're going to tighten these down and cut your own threads. It's just on these smaller 8mm that are holding either the dipstick or cable brackets in place that you'll be cutting new threads with these bolts.
And the other bolts go all the way through the housing to the block, so you don't need to worry about chasing them. Great. That one's good.
Yep. And I'll do the same with our dipstick bolt. We've got the harness bolt unplugged and 1 little push connector here holding the other part of the harness. I was able to pull that out of its bolt hole. Now the only thing holding the oil filter housing to the side of the block is our 3 main lower bolts and our upper bolt. These are all 10mm, and with the oil drained out, we can start removing them and hopefully not make that much of a mess. We've removed our 3 lower bolts, and I'm keeping all of the bolts in the new housing just to make sure I know where they go when we put all this back together. Our last one we're doing is this 1 upper bolt here. Be careful getting at this one because it's right next to a knock sensor. It may be helpful to unplug this connector and move it out of the way. If you unplug the entire knock sensor, which you can unbolt from the side of the block if you want, there is a particular torque spec if you're putting it back into place.
I'm just going to film you as you finagle it out. All right, now we got all the bolts off around the housing. You should be able to pull it straight up and out of the vehicle. Nice job, Paul. Here we go.
Yeah, on the inside here, you can definitely see a nice black crust. This has a lot of start-stop cycles on it. Short drives cause a lot of buildup and will kill PCV in a hurry. We're going to show you with this old PCV off the car what the diaphragm inside looks like. Again, if you've got a failing PCV diaphragm on these 5 cylinders, it tends to make noise, it tends to squeal. We're showing you how to do this on a bench, but with the ECU airbox out of the way, this is totally doable on the car.
Right.
But it looks a lot better on the bench here. So to replace this diaphragm, this cap here will pry off. There we go. We sell, again, both the diaphragm by itself or a complete kit with the diaphragm and the spring and a new cap. Fitment is identical between OEM Volvo and our aftermarket one.
Right.
We've got the cap and diaphragm off of this old one now, and you can see looking on the inside of here that we've got a lot of built up sludge on the inside, which it's plugging up all the tiny little passages here. That stuff will be all over the inside of your motor too. Good frequent oil changes will minimize this happening, but if you do lots of short hops, plan on PCV service every 50 to 80,000 miles instead of every 100 to 200,000 miles.
Yeah, we definitely know that this car does a lot of short hops. It gets a lot of starts, very minimal driving. It's got low miles on it at 90,000 for this year. But unfortunately, no matter what you do, even if you change the oil, but you do a lot of short hops, it's just not getting hot enough. It's not warming up and actually able to work properly. So the oil is just getting coked up and causing the PCV to be inoperable.
So much of this oil coking is temperature control, which is a problem we've seen Volvo fighting over the years on other models and other engines. This tiny little PTC heater on the side here is an electrical heating element, and it's something that Volvo ended up adding partway through the production run for these engines. They just wanted to get heat into this quickly in order to evaporate vapor and gasoline and other stuff out of this oil sludge. If you only do short hops and the car never gets hot enough, everything kind of condenses and it starts solidifying like this. There's a really terrible emulsion, the worst salad dressing you could have. Before we bolt the new housing to the side of the block, you can see the ports down here where the housing sits against the side of the block. There's a gasket that goes in between, and like any seal with a gasket, you want to make sure you have a nice clean surface in between. We are gonna hit this whole area down here with a bit of brake cleaner and give it a little wipe and put our new housing on. We've got a couple of ports on the side of the block with O-rings here to form a good seal. Like with any oil-facing O-ring, I'm going to put a little dab of oil on my finger and put a nice little coat on these. We've got one up high here and a more complicated 3-port single-piece O-ring down here, where those all sit against the side of the block. Both the OEM Volvo and aftermarket housing come with these O-rings pre-installed. We do also sell the O-rings by themselves. Right. This is a common place for leaks on these 5 cylinders, particularly this lower complicated O-ring. Right. So if you notice the bottom of your oil filter housing is pretty cruddy, but you don't have any problems with crankcase pressure, you're still drawing good vacuum, you can probably get away with just replacing this O-ring. Right. We'll maneuver our new housing down into place. Make sure you're not pinching any of your little tiny wire connectors here. Over here we've got our PTC and knock sensor wires, and we're holding those to the side. line ourselves up. Easiest to start with this upper bolt here. I'll thread that in just a little bit to get started. Make sure at this point too that you're able to connect your two hoses, your left side long hose there. If you removed the hose intact without cutting it, you'll need a new hose clamp to go around it there. And our shorter, thick L hose here, which does not have any hose clamps on it, it just pushes on to either side.
All right, so Paul has got all the bolts started. He didn't crank the top one down all the way. You don't want to do that. You want to get them all started and get them all pretty much going in at the same time. Equally, so that we spread that pressure against the box and that the PCV box applies itself up against the front of the block appropriately. So
we've got those started and we have our two upper hoses in place. We have our L-shaped hose there pressed on. That's just a press fit. And we found a hose clamp for this one here. It's not uncommon for these hoses to be really old and really brittle. Ours are still fine on this car, so we're electing to reuse them.
Yep. We went and found a hose clamp to go on the big long one, and this one just went right into place. So got a pretty good look at that. And like Paul said, the connectors are out of the way there for the PTC that's on here, and we still have not hooked up the knock sensor, so don't forget to put that in if you remove it to get to that bolt. So
those are hanging down here, but this big coolant hose right here is flexible enough that you can get your PCV housing bolts all the way cinched down and then just move this out of the way and plug your connectors back in.
Well, let's go ahead and bolt the PCV housing to the block equally and get her all down, cinch her down.
We'll do this.
And we will float the torque specs over the video here.
All right, we've got everything hooked back up here. Our 1 high and 3 low bolts are threaded all the way back in. Torque specs will float over the video here. I plugged back in our knock sensor, which we moved out of the way just to make it a little easier to access the bolt here. PTC's plugged back in. Our elbow here is pressed back on. We've got a new hose clamp for our long elbow on the other side here. I just finished tightening the little bolt holding the dipstick tube back into place, so we'll put our dipstick back in as well.
And then Paul also went down underneath the car here and tightened down the lower bottom bolts along with the wire harness bolt as well. So everything is secure completely on the PCV assembly. Right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, so next basically we're just going to go ahead and follow the reverse order. Paul's going to go ahead and get the airbox put back in place with the ECU, connect the MAF, and we'll go from there. So basically everything is just repeat in reverse.
It's not uncommon, these pegs here and our little rubber grommets that hold it into place, these will disintegrate over time. See what kind of shape yours are in before you put your PCV box back in. Yep. A little lube goes a long way here too. A little spritz of WD-40 on the inside of these here will make this go on a lot easier. Took a pretty good amount of force to wrench this out of those rubber grommets, and you don't want to break any of these plastic tabs off putting the ECU box back in.
Right.
Okay, we've double checked all of our connections down under here. It's time to put the ECU and airbox back in. Like I mentioned before, and I'm sure you saw me struggling before, this is a pretty tight fit, the alignment tabs on the airbox with these little rubber grommets on the lower intake manifold. I'm going to give those a little spritz of PB Blaster just to make my life a little bit easier before I put it all back together. It's kind of a funny down and pivot in to get this thing in. These tabs are about 1 inch long, so I'm gonna slide it in and hold it off about 1 inch, and once I'm in position I'll press it into place. On the way in, make sure to watch out for this coolant line leading to the overflow bottle on this side. It goes from over here down to a fitting on the side of the cylinder head there. It's got a little bit of flex to it, so just be careful about it. Line those up. 1, 2, 3. And press down. Put the accordion back on. MAF connector, once that hose is on. Our other connectors here. Make sure these levers are up. And then once that's firmly seated, push the lever down. Make sure it's not binding. It should pull itself down without any struggle. Same on the top in the other direction. Nice and firm, and then down. With that in place, we can put our cover back over the ECU. This just slides into place. There's some little tabs here to line it up. And this is where P3s differ from P1s. We have our intake snorkel for the air filter under here. On a P1, it's an elbow over here above the PCV housing, but on a P3, it is over here and leads towards the back of the driver's side headlight. With our snorkel back in place, all we need to worry about now is tightening down the turbo inlet that we loosened to get out of the way. We've got one bolt. Yeah, go for it. We've got our clamp here for the accordion, which we'll cinch down real quick. And then there's also our 10mm bolt on the hard pipe itself, securing that to the cylinder head back here. Alright, we've got all the pieces back in place now. Since this job involves draining all of the oil, and since the new housing comes with a new filter, as I mentioned before, this is a great time for an oil change. Whether you're doing new oil or reusing your oil, top it back off and do your normal oil change procedure. Let it run for a little bit, shut it off, check the level, top off as needed. Since you were replacing the housing, we do suggest getting under there when the car is running and taking a look at where the oil filter housing bolts to the block, just making extra sure there's no leaks there. And I suppose that's it.
Yeah, nice job, Paul. We hope everybody enjoyed watching this video. Hopefully it will help you if you have to tackle PCV on your P1 or P3 model in the 5-cylinder. You guys can check out the website or call IPD anytime. We will have applications listed for all this, but thanks for watching, and thank you, Paul, for knocking this out. Good job.
Thanks for tuning in.